So I went on a little hiking trip with my dad to Shasta, California, a small town in Northern California near the Oregon border. Shasta is home to a potentially active volcano named, of course, Mount Shasta. There are many trails on this mountain too, so my father and I were excited to do some hiking. We drove up the side of the mountain to the parking lot in which one of the trails begins. I believe it was called the Old Ski Bowl Trail or something. The landscape was a very barren incline though, filled with rocks, boulders, dirt, and very few trees. About an hour into the trail, we came across a very odd assembly of these large boulders. They were sort of arranged in a circle, and we thought that it was weird, but we continued on. If you look up pictures of the trail, you'll see much smaller rocks arranged in patterns and circles too. And my father and I only encountered 3 people. Well, at least that's what they appeared to be at first. The first 2 were a father and son. We met them on a steep incline that went along the wall of the cliff that would then switch back as it reached to the top of the cliff. We stopped and we said hello, talked about the trail, and then went our separate ways. But here is where it gets weird. So Dad and I kept walking up the incline for just about 2 minutes. I turned around and I saw the father and the son so far down the trail that it just didn't make any sense. It should have taken them at least 20 minutes to get down there to where they were, but somehow they were there in only about 2 minutes. To this day, I have absolutely no idea how that could have happened. I mean, there was no one else on the trail at that point, and I could see the color of their clothes from that distance, so I knew that it was them. I pointed it out to my dad, and we both thought that it was weird, but we tried not to dwell on it, and we just kept going. And here is where it gets so much weirder. So as we reached the top of the cliff, there was another strange rock arrangement that was off to the side of the trail. This time, there were far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows, almost like gravestones. We continued on the trail and reached another sort of incline with a switchback to reach the top of another cliff. We reached a point where we would actually need climbing gear to continue, so at that point, we decided that we should just head back. But when we turned around, I saw a man standing among the rocks, just staring at us. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features, but it was almost as if he had none. Like, his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed him out to my dad, and then the man just quickly ducked down behind a boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It almost seemed playful, like a child trying to hide. For a few moments, too, I was sort of out of it, and I actually have no recollection of what was going on. But according to my dad, I started walking towards this guy in the hat. My dad was calling to me, "Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And then I finally came to. I was apparently standing pretty much right at the edge of the cliff. It was a huge drop as well, enough to kill me or seriously injure me for sure. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back to the trail, and he told me to stay put, and my dad went down to the boulders to search for this guy, but when he did, he wasn't there. But again, the strange thing is that there was just nowhere for him to go except for up or down that trail. It really didn't make any sense because he had just disappeared. I have no idea what's going on that trail, and I still have no explanation for that whole day. I've told this many times to family and friends, and nobody else has any explanation too. I've done research and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. I've also read that the Native American tribes from the area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe that it could act as a portal to other dimensions or something, and that it's guarded by spirits who would potentially harm anyone who tried to go up to the volcano. I really don't know about any of that, but if anybody has any similar experiences or any insight at all, then I sure would love to hear it, because the whole thing is just really confusing. So please, do share anything that you have to offer, and Thanks for listening. I've always wanted to share this story, and I decided that I should do it. I don't really have any way of proving my credibility or anything, but if you've ever visited or live in rural parts of South Asia, you can probably vouch for me in saying that it's a lot more plausible than one might assume. Also, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought, but I wanted to recount it precisely the way that I remember it. So I had one of those moments recently where a lot of things just came together in my brain to make sense of an event that my child mind couldn't properly comprehend at the time. My mum was born and raised in the UK, but she's of South Asian descent, and since I'm mixed, she tries really hard to make sure that I'm in touch with my culture. This meant too that as a child, we made a lot of frequent visits back home. It was like every summer that I can remember was spent there, and then it just suddenly stopped after this incident. So my mum's family back home live in an extremely rural part of the country. There's a lot of poverty surrounding our family home, so we rarely left our relatively nice part of the village. I was never allowed out to explore, but coming from the concrete jungle that is London, I was always really curious. And I'm going to explain what happened on this one particular day the way that I remember experiencing it, and then I'll explain what I failed to realize at the time. So I was 8 at the time. One of my uncles from a neighbouring village would often visit with his children, and when they did, my mum would let me go with them to a small hut-like shop that sold sweets and snacks like 15 minutes away from the family home. My cousins were 11 and 19, both male, and it was broad daylight when we would do this. But to get to the shop, we would walk through a small DIY road, and on both sides it was what I would call the jungle. It was basically just lots of trees and bushes as far as you could see. You can't really see anything beyond the trees. It's just a lot of greenery. Like I said too, I'm actually mixed with East Asian, and I definitely get my looks from my dad's side, so being an obvious foreigner in a rural part of Black Home meant that I was pretty used to strangers staring and asking me questions. I was also used to creepy men that would tell me that I was beautiful because I have pale skin. My mum definitely warned me about these men though, and always made sure that I knew to stay away from them. But anyway, the road to the hut was paved with these creepy people making creepy comments, and my cousins basically telling them to leave me alone, in less pleasant terms. There was also a group of young guys. Some of them had motorbikes, and some were just chilling. One of them waved at me. He seemed friendly enough, and I'd met a lot of people, so I just waved back and went about my day. Once we got to the hut, we immediately started losing our self-control with the snacks. The owner was super friendly, and he let us try a bunch of sweets, and he also had some ice cream for the first time or something. I distinctly remember being really excited because my mum and one of the ladies that worked as a cook both loved this sort of ice cream, so I thought that it would be a nice surprise for them. I asked for 3, and the guy actually gave me 4, and so my hands were completely full, and they were quickly melting, and he told me to run, go home quickly. I told my cousins that I would get a running start, and once they finished, they could catch up with me. I would still be in their line of sight, plus it was daylight, and it was a busy road. So I start running back, and there were a few older aunties stood at the top of the road, and something about their presence just gave me a sense of security. I felt a lot safer knowing that they were there, and paired with the fact that my cousins were able to see me clearly, I felt comfortable enough to just walk back, leisurely, minding my business, eating my ice cream. I passed a group of guys, and the one that waved at me came over to me, and he said that I was so-and-so's niece, right? So-and-so being my uncle. And he jokingly took one of my ice creams and said she got an ice cream for Mama. Mama means uncle in our language. And so I just assumed that he was a friend of my uncle's. He then asked me when I arrived and how I was finding the country. He was actually really friendly, and he didn't look like the stereotypical creep that I was warned about. When I said that I was going to go home, he said, "Why don't you let Uncle take you? You can ride on my motorbike." I think that was when something clicked in my mind, that he maybe wasn't the friendly uncle that I thought he was. That's also when I realized I was pretty much circled in and was surrounded by a group now. It's also when I realized that I couldn't see my cousins anymore, or the group of old ladies, which also meant that they probably couldn't see me. I wish that I could explain in words just how helpless and afraid I was feeling. I had all the threats in the world explained to me by my mum in a country where I knew that I was vulnerable and had to be cautious, and still, I had somehow managed to find myself in this dangerous situation. Luckily though, my cousins came running and shouting, probably because I was their responsibility, and the guys ran off into the jungle. This creeped me out though, because there was just nothing in that jungle. Or so I thought. It was just trees as far as I could see, and I knew that it was going to be nearly impossible to find them in all of that. It caused quite the scene though, and the villagers seemed to react as if they were already on edge. When I told my family what had happened, I was basically on house arrest, and my mum refused me out of her sight. I was pretty shook up by the whole situation, and so, honestly, I was kind of grateful for it. And I put it down to my paranoia, but at the time, I would just get this overwhelming feeling of being watched. Our village is quite small, like amongst them it's an everyone knows everyone sort of thing. My uncle is also a big community figure, and he's very well known amongst the villagers, which is why the men probably put two and two together that I was his niece. Having foreign family over is usually a pretty big deal here, and having a niece that is mixed race was also a very big deal. I'm sure that word got around, in other words. But he soon realized that there was a group of men on motorbikes who would frequently go past our house. They stayed a distance away from our home, but they weren't anyone that we would have known. It's creepy to think about too now, that the lengths that they were going to. Anyway, a couple of days before we were due to fly back, I had my second, last, and worst encounter with this particular friendly uncle. So it was night, and it was like every other night where we would play board games or card games in the front room. Because it was so hot, I went to my bedroom and I was playing on my Nintendo DS. What a throwback, right? When I saw out of the corner of my eye someone at the window, staring directly at me. And it was him. The worst part, though, is that he had the most creepy and sick and twisted smile on him that I'd ever seen on a person. He put a finger to his lips, but I did the literal opposite and started screaming hysterically. I had been on edge since the ice cream incident, so what might seem like an overreaction was just my natural response at the time. I can't really tell what happened next because no one has ever told me, but my very large uncle and his also very large friends are not known to be the friendliest of people, but I was told that he was dealt with and that he would never bother me again. Now, we recently received a wedding film from one of my cousin's weddings, and a part of the film was her leaving to get to the venue, and I noticed that the jungle was no longer there. It had basically been cut down, and for the first time I could see beyond the greenery. That was when my mum explained to me that my uncle had it cut down not long after that particular visit because of the head cutters, and it sounds even more sinister in my own language. So my entire life, I've always been wondering what would have happened to me if I'd got on that motorbike, but now I know with reasonable certainty what his intentions were. Because during that time, a gang had actually kidnapped beggar children. It took a while for the village to realize because it's not unusual for beggar children to just go missing there. But when we were there, people were vaguely aware that it was becoming a trend. A couple of months later, a head was found, and it became known to our village, but people tried to keep it quiet to avoid getting a bad name. The problem went away once a lot of the greenery was cut down, so there was nowhere left to hide, but it's also when they realized the magnitude of what had actually happened. The weird thing is that I've known about the head cutters for a while. I knew that it was something that had occurred in our village, but for some reason, until recently, I just never really put two and two together. But now that I have, I often think about what, well, nearly happened to me. But more importantly, what happened to a handful of children in our little village? I often think about the fact that beyond our relatively small circle, well, no one really thinks about them. No one's haunted by their deaths. It's weird and sort of surreal when I think back about it all too, and realize just how close I was to being one of those children. About a year and a half ago, I was standing on my back deck just having a smoke. I live in a row of duplexes where the back of my house directly faces the back house of the street behind me. From where I was standing, I could see into their kitchen window and dining room and living room. Also, the layouts of these houses are all pretty similar. I also think that it's probably pretty important to mention that I was completely sober at the time. It was in the summer around dusk. I would say 9 o'clock as my kid and fiancé were both in bed. It was light enough out that I could see clearly in my backyard, but dark enough that the windows in the house facing me were bright and clear, allowing me to see into them. From what I can tell too, it's a pretty normal couple that lives there. A bald man who seems to do all the cooking, his short blonde wife who jogs and has an in-home daycare. I often see them in the evening eating supper and hanging out before bed while I'm on the deck smoking. Nothing about them or their house ever struck me as odd, until this incident, and nothing like this has ever happened since. So, as I was standing there, I noticed something in their kitchen window. From what I can gather, the kitchen window is in front of a sink, and at first glance I thought it was a child in a costume, specifically a Spider-Man costume as it looked red. This child was perched in the window with its leg bent, arms bent as well. In my head, I was trying to rationalize how this kid was holding this position so well in the space, what size it would have to be to fit there, etc. As I was trying to figure this out, all of a sudden this thing starts swinging from the ceiling. Exactly how you would imagine a monkey swinging too. It swings around the kitchen and into the other rooms. I can see it moving throughout the windows. The entire time the couple in this house seems completely unaware of it too. They're just going about their business, tidying up, walking from room to room, not affected at all by this thing hanging from the ceiling and moving to and fro from the kitchen window. I was obviously mesmerized. I couldn't stop watching because I was trying to figure out what the hell it was. If it was a kid, why weren't they yelling at them for being so reckless? If it was an animal, why hadn't I seen it before? I continued watching, and every second that passed, I just grew more and more confused. It moved sharp and quickly. The size and perspective seemed to shift based on where it was. Then it came back to the window, and it perched again. This time, I tried to focus very hard on its features. I couldn't make out any details except that it was really skinny and flexible and had an angular face and was red. As I watched it, all of a sudden I just got this feeling of absolute terror and dread. This thing was making eye contact with me, and I could tell. I couldn't make out what color the eyes were, which I know doesn't make sense, but it was all blurring together kind of. Suddenly, I felt locked in place. This window was about 150 feet away, and I felt like it was getting closer. This thing in the window then started projecting itself towards me. In fact, exactly how things come toward you in a 3D movie. This is hard to explain, but it kind of stayed on the window but got closer. I stood there for a few seconds, frozen with fear, and then I felt like it was going to come so close that it would touch me. I have never felt so scared and threatened in my life, and I immediately turned away, ran inside, and got my fiancé. I was terrified and didn't want to go outside again, so I made him come to the upstairs bathroom window and peek out into the window. This thing was still very much there. It was swinging around from the ceiling again, almost playfully. It came back to the window and looked out a few times and then continued to move around the house. Now, my fiancé is an atheist. He doesn't believe in ghosts or God or anything he can't see. But he saw it and was not able to explain it too. He said to me, "It must be a monkey, right?" and just brushed it off. I explained what I experienced to him, and he agreed that it was messed up, but that was the end of it for him pretty much. He was satisfied with the one night only monkey explanation, and that was the end of it. To be honest though, I feel like it's more likely that this was something paranormal than a visiting monkey in a costume that was never to be seen again, and I'm hoping that you can help me figure it out. This has honestly shaken me, and I've spent a lot of time looking up demons or entities, trying to figure out what it could have been, and why it got so close to me. Or was it trying to possess or attack me or something? How come it was only there once? I've looked into the history of the area where we lived as best as I can, and it really hasn't turned up anything that's jumped out at me. And so, any direction or feedback that you guys might have would be greatly appreciated. So I'm a male teenager, and last year I was coming out of school with my earphones in and my school bags with me. I go to a fencing club at my school, I do saber, but it starts 2 hours after school, so I usually go into town and just buy something to eat. I was coming close to the subway when I noticed a guy walking down the street towards me. It immediately set off alarm bells too, because he looked really unhappy until he saw me and then just beamed at me and showed his black teeth and then rubbed his crotch. I thought that he was just being weird or just making a really unfunny joke. He had on a dirty blue jacket with torn jeans, and definitely not the ones that are torn for style. I walked past him and I just kept going. I looked behind me and sure enough, this dude was now following me. I thought that I might have been paranoid, so I tried a few things to check. Firstly, I stopped in front of a shop window and pretended to tie my laces. I saw in the window that he stopped as well, and he began looking into his phone, but I could tell that he was on the camera. He kept using his fingers to adjust the zoom and kept moving the position of the phone, all while staring at it really hard. Next, I pulled a pound coin out of my pocket and walked up to an elderly couple and asked them if they had dropped it. I tried to stall for as long as possible, and he stopped and began messing with his phone camera again. I knew for sure that he was following me now, and I had a stroke of genius. My best friend's mum works in an extremely high-end women's jewelry store, one that you have to actually get invited to the store to enter, and the cheapest things there are at least $4,000. This was important because I knew that there was a 24/7 security guard stationed there who actually knew me, because I was always with friends and we would walk past him to get to the train station to go home every day. It was only a 2-minute walk away, but I could get there a lot faster if I walked a bit faster. I disguised my sudden burst in speed as me just walking in time with the music, head nodding, hitting my thighs to an imaginary beat, rhythmic steps. He sped up as well, but it would look suspicious if he went as fast as I did, so he hung back a bit. I eventually got to the place, and I told the security guard that I needed to talk to my friend's mum, and also warned him about the stalker and why I wanted to see her. He let me in, and I talked to her, and she said that I could stay there for as long as I needed to be sure that I was safe. I watched through the window as the stalker approached the shop and tried to walk in the door. The security guard doesn't unlock the door, and he just asks him what he was doing. Friend's mum radios the security guard quietly and tells him that this is the guy that I was talking about. The security guard told him to go away. Stalker refused. The security guard repeats himself more aggressively and gets the same response. The security guard steps forward and says in his most aggressive tone that he could muster, "Leave now before I floor you and knock all of your teeth into that conveniently placed drain." The stalker looks back and sees that the security guard is not bullcrapping him and there is actually a drain there. He obviously thought that it just wasn't worth the risk, and so he left. I stayed for an hour and then I left. When I got back to my school though, I saw the dude following me again, so I got into my school grounds to see if he would follow me in, and he did. I pulled my saber out of my bag. He began saying that he wasn't going to hurt me and that he just wanted to talk to me. He said that he thought that I was super handsome and he wanted to be my boyfriend. This dude looked like he was in his 30s too. I obviously shut him down and told him to just get lost, but he didn't. By this time, I think that he knew that I wasn't going to cooperate and that I wouldn't be going without a fight. But he must have thought that I was too scared to use it because he began hurling insults at me. I stepped forward with my sword and he backed off. Because the sports hall overlooks the car park, my coach saw me in the entrance, and the car park is right next to it, with my sword drawn at a random stranger. He ran out with his own to parry mine if I tried to hurt the dude, because he probably thought that I was doing something dumb and there wasn't a reason for it. He yelled for me to explain myself, and I told him what had happened. The creep insisted that it was wrong, but I contacted my friend's mum and she verified the story. And soon after, he ran off and I haven't seen him since. I feel like it was just blind luck that led me to safety, but why am I glad that I noticed him when I did? So a couple of months ago, I shared here about different experiences that my sons have had in their rooms. Finally, I myself had an experience, and that was what prompted me to share my story here. It got a bit of attention, and I received some good advice from some people here, so I thought that I would type an update. The last story left off immediately after my own experience. I was rattled and confused about the glowing eyes that I saw in my oldest son's room, so I took action. When my sons went to spend the weekend at their grandparents' house, my husband went to work the night shift, and I braced myself. That night I went upstairs and I took a look around before I went to bed. I made sure to mark my territory by walking into every room, making around and saying out loud, "This is my house and this is my son's room. You don't live here anymore." Now, some of you would clearly advise against this since I didn't know what the hell was up there, or if it was even aggressive, but I didn't have sage to burn or time to call in a clairvoyant or anything. I had 2 days till my boys would come home, and that was it. That night, as I went to bed, I turned a little light on in my room, and I was trying not to seem scared, but man, the darkness at this point was oppressive. I laid down in bed, and immediately the light blew up. It smelled horrible, and I was in complete darkness. I jumped out of bed and turned on the ceiling lamp, and it blew out too. So I did what any rational person would do. I freaked out and yelled things like, "So you're going to blow up every lamp in my house? What then? I'm not going anywhere." I marched upstairs in the light of my phone's flashlight and repeated my "this is my house" chant a couple of times, until I calmed down and started to wonder what the hell is up. My guess is that this thing knew what my intentions were and was actually pissed that my sons weren't in the house, so it took it out on me. I went downstairs thinking that I'm going to be alone in this house until 7:30 in the morning. Shivering at this point, I went into the bedroom to change the light bulbs when I heard the piano in the living room. Just a frustrated smack on the keys and then silence. And after that, the house was quiet for the rest of the night. Actually, for the rest of the weekend. We still have experiences, but a lot less than before. The kids stay in their rooms and beds most nights, and they aren't that scared anymore. I still prance around upstairs once a day, telling this thing to leave my house. It seems to be a game of stubbornness at this point, I think. But anyway, I just would like to say a big thank you to all of the people that gave me advice on the last time I told the story. I'll see how this goes, and if anything changes, I'll let you guys know. This happened in Daytona Beach, Florida in 2012. It was the summer between my freshman and sophomore years in high school. My grandparents lived in Florida at the time, close to Daytona, but not actually in there. And we decided to take a vacation within a vacation and spend a weekend at a hotel there. When we got there, for whatever reason, my grandparents decided that they just didn't want to stay and that they would come pick me and my mum up at the end of the weekend, since they only lived about an hour away. My mum and I asked them to drop us off at Joe's Crab Shack for dinner, and we were going to walk back to our hotel. Somehow, we completely misjudged how far away the restaurant was from our hotel, so it ended up being an insanely long walk, like 6 or 7 miles, when we were expecting 2 to 3 max. And on the way back to the hotel, it got pretty dark on us. There was enough light from the street to be able to see pretty decently, but to get up to the street we would have to go through an alleyway, and we didn't feel comfortable with that, so we decided that we would just stay on the beach. Now, I want to say that even though it was dark, there was a full moon and enough light from the street that whenever we passed a person, we could clearly make out a face if we were close enough. So while the dark may have played a small factor in this, I don't think it was enough of a factor that I can just dismiss the experience. So, as we're walking, we see a light ahead toward us about 6-ish feet off the ground. We weren't too concerned because it looked like somebody going the opposite direction as us wearing a headlamp, like a nighttime stroll on the beach or something. As the light got closer, we noticed that the light was extremely steady. Not like somebody walking, and especially not like somebody walking on the sand. As it got close to us, this is what we saw. There was a cloaked figure wearing a brown monk-like cloak with a large hood. It wasn't walking, but kind of gliding along. There were no visible feet. There was a light shining out from under the hood of the cloak. There was no face, and except for the light, it appeared to be completely black inside, almost like an empty cloak floating through the air without a person inside. Strangely, too, it didn't seem to notice us and just kind of glided on past. My mum and I remember this exactly the same, and believe me, I'm pretty much into science the whole way, but I really can't explain this one, as it was definitely light enough that we should have seen a face, or at least feet. Have any of you guys come across something like this before? What are your thoughts?